Well, this week it has been eerily quiet around our church buildings. No groups coming and going, no people gathering on a Sunday, no kids tearing up and down the hill on their bikes and making a joyous noise for us to all enjoy. Instead, we're all home. Instead, we're all staying put. And that is, to be honest, a really good thing. It's a loving thing. It's a sensible thing for us to be doing, because we all know that this virus now does not have legs. The only way it makes a journey from one person to another is if we take it on that journey. All of us have learnt, I think, way more about epidemiology in the past week than we ever thought we would need to. And it turns out that gatherings like the ones that we usually have here on a Sunday are just the kind of perfect environment for a virus to spread. And so us not running them is a really good call, a really loving call. But I suspect that the fact that we've called off our Sunday meetings is leading a lot of people out there to think that we are kind of shut down, that we're on pause. Because if church equals the Sunday gathering of everyone being together and singing and praying and stuff, if that's what church is and if that's not happening, then that must mean that nothing is happening. You know, we're on hiatus, we're sleeping, we're waiting until all this blows over and then we'll, yawn and stretch and come out of our hibernation and get back to doing what we do. And maybe that's the vibe that you have picked up, perhaps as a member of our church. Sunday church isn't happening and hopefully it'll be back soon. But we've just got to shut up shop for a bit, bunker down, wait it out. The Central Villages will be back, but it's not running now. And I want to say to you this morning, if you're feeling that way, that is not it at all, not at all. We are not shut down, because what we are and what we do can never be shut down. The risen Lord Jesus is the one powering our mission, and his mission transcends all the barriers and all the frustrations. His mission is one that needs to keep on taking place today, this week, this month. People desperately need us to keep on being God's church in this part of the world. John chapter 20, that part that Maureen read for us a second ago, it's an amazing little passage. I'm going to run us through it a little bit and help us to think about some principles from it. It opens with the disciples, and they're huddled together in this kind of terrified lockdown, something that a lot of us are sort of getting to grips with in the last week. They've actually taken it to the next level though. They have barred the doors, they've switched off the lights because, have a look with me, this is why they're doing it. Verse 19, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. Here's what's going on, right? It's 2 days after Jesus' brutal execution. He was hung on that Roman cross, and he had said to his disciples, he'd explained that he was doing this for them, that this was a deliberate act of self-sacrificial love, him taking on the death that they couldn't die. But that all seemed ridiculous now. Because these disciples, they had stood there and watched while Jesus was killed. They'd seen him kind of draw his last breath. They'd seen the body with a giant gash wound in its side from being stabbed by a spear be dragged off the cross and put in a tomb. It feels like it's game over. And now, the morning of this evening when they're gathering, in that morning, a couple of the disciples had seen the tomb empty. But they just couldn't believe that it was actually real, that he'd come back to life. They just figured grave robbers. Someone's pinched the body. Mary Magdalene had come and she'd actually met the risen Lord Jesus, and she'd rushed back and she'd told the disciples, but they just wouldn't believe her. They couldn't believe her. It seemed too far-fetched. And so that means that here they are that evening in lockdown, afraid that Jesus, their hero, is gone, afraid that they'd backed the wrong horse, afraid that any second now the Jewish leaders are going to barge in and arrest them and kill them as well. They're in fear. But, and this is beautiful, but all of that fear leaves the room in an instant. In an instant. And it gets replaced with this deep, powerful joy, deep, life-changing joy. Here's how it goes down. We'll start from verse 19 again. It says, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Jesus shows up. He comes and spends time with them, and in an instant, they get it. This resurrection that they've been told about, that they had doubted, it's now clear as day, a true thing. There is Jesus right there in front of them in the flesh, still kind of bearing, still showing the wounds that he had suffered on the cross as he defeated death, that he defeated sin. Jesus is there. It was not all a failure. It was not all a mistake. They had not backed the wrong horse. Jesus is legit. He's telling the truth. He really has achieved the impossible. And this, in a moment, changes everything for the disciples. The first thing that changes is that they receive peace. Jesus comes in and he gives them what is a pretty standard Middle Eastern greeting, saying, "Peace be with you." But I suspect that as on that day, as Jesus spoke those words, they were being given more significance than they've ever had before. Peace be with you. Jesus sees these scared, worried friends of his, and he says, "I've come to bring you peace. I've come to set your hearts at peace." This is a message that I think we can and need to take great comfort in. The God who knows us, the God who loves us, the God who made us, he wants us to hear from him a message that begins with peace. He wants what is best for us. He wants us to have a kind of healed peace relationship with each other, a healed peace relationship with our world. Especially, he wants us to have a healed peace relationship with him. And what Jesus had just done allowed that to be true. They receive peace. The other thing they receive is they receive proof. These doubting disciples, they're as skeptical as the rest of us. They really do think that there's no way that Jesus could possibly have come back alive again. But then here he is. They're seeing him in the person, in the flesh. He's there with them. And it's clearly him. And he's still got the gash marks in his side, the reminders of what he's just been through. He really had died. He really had sacrificed himself to take on himself God's anger at our sin. But now he's back. The resurrection really does change everything. And if this is something that you're not sure about, you're still wrestling with it, you're trying to think it through, then please do something to help you wrestle with that uncertainty. Read a great book or ask a friend to explain it to you, or read the scriptures again, or pray to the God of the universe that he would help you with this. This is going to be a more important topic than ever in the coming weeks. Please take the time to figure out what you think. They receive peace, they receive proof, they also receive joy. In a moment, these disciples go from terrified to triumphant. They go from crushed and cowering to cheering and celebrating. And I think that's really fascinating, because, right, it's not as though the thing that was making them be so scared, the thing that was making them be so frightened has actually gone away. The authorities, these Jewish authorities, could still have barged in at any second now and arrested them, put them in prison, killed them. That still could have happened. The threat has not left. So what has changed? Well, what has changed now is their perspective. And so what about the threat of arrest? So what about the threat of imprisonment? So what about the threat of death? When you put them in comparison with the kind of life-changing, earth-shattering news that Jesus has blasted through death. He's entered into the grave and bashed a hole out the other side and said, "I can do this for all of you." In comparison with that, the fear of arrest, the fear of death, it starts to look so much smaller in comparison to what Jesus can clearly do. If you are feeling fear right now, then you're not alone. I'm with you. There is so much about this situation that I think should worry us, should leave us concerned. We've seen in the media this past week stories of people who are just not taking the situation seriously, and they're endangering others by their actions, and that's not a loving thing to do. We just need to be real in understanding that things might get worse. There could very well be deaths that take place in our circles because of this. And that is scary because death is not natural. We were not made for this. It hurts us like nothing else because it's an intrusion into God's good world. It does not belong here. But thank God today that we can take a different perspective on it all. Thank God today that we can stop and reflect on the fact that Jesus has deep power. Jesus has deep love. He's shown it to us on the cross, and he's shown it to us in his resurrection. And that power, that love, it has the ability to fight our fear like nothing else can. We can be certain that death will not hold us down. The last thing that the disciples receive at this point, this amazing point, they don't just receive joy, but they also receive a job. Have a look with me at verse 21. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." In John's Gospel, there's this language of being sent a lot of times, about 40 times really. And all of the times, up to this point, it is Jesus being sent. The Father has sent Jesus to do this work, to do this mission, to undertake this mission of love. But now at this point, it gets kind of turned a bit, doesn't it? Now the person being sent is not Jesus, but it is Jesus doing the sending, and the people who he is sending are us, his disciples. It's now part of our DNA as Christians. Christians are people who go out, who are sent. And it's not to go and do the same things that Jesus did. We can't do that. But it's to go and tell people of the amazing things that Jesus has done. We get the privilege of being sent to go and share peace. And not the kind of peace that lots of people are trying to enjoy at this time. Not the peace from spending 8 hours a day on the lounge watching Netflix. But real peace, right? We are given the privilege of sharing real peace. It comes from knowing that Jesus is real. He's real at defeating sin. He's real at defeating death. He died. He's now alive. That changes everything, especially for us at a time like this. At this point in our church's history, things are very different, probably more different than they've ever been before, but this is not hibernation time. Society might be shutting down, but the church is not shutting down. We need to be getting out there and sharing with people the good news of the gospel. And let me be clear, when I say getting out there, I do not mean actually getting out there. We don't leave your house, stay home, love others, do the right thing, be responsible. But we still need to be getting out there in the ways that we still can. Share church online with somebody, give someone a ring on the phone, send them a link to a great article, send them a book. Provide for their needs in some way to help them to kind of come to grips with the love that we have for them because Jesus has it for them. And this past week, our fresh food pantry ran, and we're going to probably try and pivot it next time it runs in a fortnight to make it a bit more of a home delivery thing to keep people safe. Come and be part of that. We're planning on having a bit of an initiative where we buy some vouchers from some of the local shops that are doing it tough, some of the cafes and restaurants, and we give them to those who are serving on the front lines in our hospital, in our pharmacy, in our doctor's surgeries, in our local IGA. Come be part of that. In the coming weeks, we can expect to be hearing lots of talk about the massive need to care for the vulnerable. And let me say that I think that actually includes you now. I think it includes all of us. We are all, in a sense, vulnerable at this point. We're used to the vulnerable being somebody else out there. I'm fine, let's go and help all those poor people out. But things have shifted. Under the current circumstances, we are all being challenged. We're all being challenged by loneliness. We're all going to be challenged by grief. We're all going to be challenged by having crazy kids in the house and you suddenly have to homeschool them, and who knows how to do that? Now, social distancing is really critical, but relational distancing would just be a disaster at this point. As God's people, we need to make sure that we're still meeting together. Maybe it's over the screen like this, maybe it's over the back fence, maybe it's over the phone, over the postal system if you want to get old school and write a letter, but we need to maintain contact, don't we? We don't want to share COVID-19, but we do want to share life. We don't want to share COVID-19, but we do want to make sure we're sharing Jesus. Now is the time for us to step back and watch the greatness and goodness of God shine, to see the power of the gospel at work in these really difficult circumstances. We need to be overcoming the barriers that are in front of us and continue to meet together. We need to overcome the barriers that are in front of us and continue to share Jesus with people. We're not on pause, we're not in hibernation, but we're convinced that Jesus is the best news that anyone has ever needed to hear, even more so under these circumstances. As death and fear kind of ravage us, we know that there is a person who is so powerful that he can drive it away. Let's make sure that we stay sharing him at this time. Have a good week.